Have you ever been stranded by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Have you ever stood outside in the cold, clutching your phone, realizing that the family you'd trusted your whole life had already decided you weren't worth saving? That's where my story begins. And believe me, what followed wasn't just heartbreak. It was betrayal so deep, it lit a fire in me that could only be put out by revenge. Before we dive in, let me say this. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or left behind like you didn't matter, stick with me, because in this story, the tables turn. What they thought was my weakness became the very thing that destroyed them. And if you're new here, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. This channel is where we expose betrayal, serve justice, and prove that revenge can be the sweetest closure of all. My name is Lauren Hayes, and I grew up in a small town outside Indianapolis. On the surface, it was the kind of town where people waved from porches and church bells rang on Sundays. But beneath that picture-perfect surface, families carried secrets like heavy stones, mine especially. I was the eldest daughter of 3. My parents, Patricia and Michael Hayes, were respected in our community. Dad worked at a local insurance office, Mom volunteered at the church and ran bake sales. To outsiders, they looked like the model couple, but what people didn't see was the quiet favoritism that poisoned our household. My younger sister, Jenna, was the golden child. Blonde hair, perfect smile, grades that teachers praised. My younger brother, Tyler, was the baby of the family, the one everyone doted on, excused, defended. And me? I was just there. Reliable Lauren, the one who picked Jenna up from practice, who babysat Tyler when Mom was too tired, who blended into the background so completely that even my achievements felt invisible. By high school, I had stopped expecting recognition. Straight A's, barely a nod, a lead role in the school play. Don't get too full of yourself, Lauren. But let Jenna bring home a B+ in math, and suddenly it was, "You're brilliant, honey. We're so proud." I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd escape, build my own life, and finally matter to someone. But when you grow up invisible, that hunger for acknowledgement never really leaves you. The night everything changed, I was 19. It was late January, bitterly cold, snow crunching like glass underfoot. I had gone to visit a friend who lived an hour away. My car, a rusty old Honda, died on the side of the highway just as the temperature dropped below freezing. My phone battery was at 12%. Panic clawed at me. I was young, alone, stranded in the dark. I dialed my parents first, certain they'd come. "Gad," I said, shivering. "The car broke down. I'm near mile marker 148. Can you come get me?" There was a pause, then a sigh. "Lauren, it's late. You should have checked the gas. Can't you call someone else?" "I'm freezing," I whispered. "Please." He sighed again. "We'll see what we can do." Then he hung up. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. My phone battery dipped lower. Finally, I called again. This time, Mom answered. "Oh, Lauren, we're just sitting down for dinner," she said, her voice warm with annoyance. "We can't just drop everything for you. Call Jenna. She just got her license. She can handle it." So I did. I called Jenna. She answered on the third ring, laughter and music in the background. "Oh, Lauren, are you serious? I'm at a party. I can't just leave." My throat tightened. "Jenna, please. I'm stranded. It's so cold I can't feel my fingers." Her voice softened, just for a moment. "Look, maybe Tyler can ask Dad to drive him later, but I'm not leaving this party. Sorry." And then she hung up. That's when the battery died. The screen went black, and I was left on the side of that road, snow falling harder, headlights from distant cars blurring my vision. I remember sitting back in the driver's seat, pulling my thin jacket tighter, wondering if I would even make it until morning. Somehow, by sheer luck, a kind stranger stopped. A middle-aged man in a pickup truck named Roger. He saw my hazard lights, pulled over, and helped tow my car to a nearby gas station. He even bought me a cup of coffee while I called the tow service from the station's landline. When I stumbled back into my parents' house 3 hours later, exhausted and numb, they barely looked up from the TV. "You made it," Dad said flatly. "See? You're fine." No apology, no concern, just indifference. Something in me broke that night. Not from the cold, but from the realization that I could have died and they would have shrugged. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an afterthought. The weeks that followed only confirmed it. My parents criticized me for making a scene. Jenna laughed about it with her friends. Lauren freaked out like the world was ending just because her car broke down. Tyler parroted their words. I wanted to scream, to make them see how much they'd failed me. But every time I tried, the same words echoed back. Stop being dramatic. Stop making everything about you. I started sleeping less, eating less. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake replaying the sound of those phone calls, the way their voices carried no urgency, no love. I began journaling obsessively, pages filled with questions. Why don't they care? Why wasn't I enough? What did I do to deserve being invisible? And then, slowly, the questions shifted. What would happen if I stopped playing the invisible one? What if, instead of begging them to see me, I made them wish they had? That was the seed of revenge. It didn't sprout overnight. At first, I just pulled back. I stopped volunteering to help Jenna with her homework. I stopped driving Tyler to his practices. I stopped setting the table before dinner. My absence was met with irritation, not concern. Lauren, don't be selfish, Mom snapped. We all have to pitch in. I bit back the retort. Where was your pitching in when I was freezing on the side of the road? Instead, I nodded, quietly biding my time. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A month later, Dad got sick. Nothing life-threatening, but bad enough that he missed work for weeks. Bills piled up. The family leaned heavily on Jenna, who hated responsibility, and on Tyler, who was still a kid. And suddenly, they noticed my absence. Lauren, can you pick up groceries? Lauren, your brother needs a ride. Lauren, could you just... Each request dripped with entitlement, as if they'd forgotten how they abandoned me when I needed them most. And each time I smiled sweetly and said, sorry, I can't. The looks on their faces, confusion, irritation, dawning realization, were small victories. But I wanted more. The night it crystallized, I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought about that snowy night, about the way my teeth had chattered, about the relief in Roger's eyes when he found me. And I thought, they could have lost me, and it wouldn't have mattered. But what if they lost what mattered to them? What if they lost their precious image, their reputation, their golden child illusions? That was when my plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to scream or beg or fight. I was going to let them unravel themselves. And I would be there every step of the way to make sure the world saw it happen. The weeks after Dad's illness exposed every crack in our family dynamic. It was as though the world tilted, and suddenly everyone realized just how much weight I'd been carrying in silence. Only instead of acknowledging it, they acted like my help was owed. One evening, Mom cornered me in the kitchen. The air smelled like overcooked casserole, her perfume too strong, cloying. Lauren, she said, arms crossed, you need to start pulling your weight. Your father's sick, Jenna's overwhelmed with her studies, and Tyler, well, he's just a boy. You're the oldest. It's your responsibility. I set down the dish towel I was holding, my voice steady. My responsibility? Like it was your responsibility to leave me freezing on the side of the road in January? Her face tightened, a flash of guilt, or maybe annoyance crossing it. But she didn't apologize. She never did. Instead, she sighed like I was unreasonable. We can't keep circling back to that. You're fine. You survived. You survived. as if that was enough. Those words burrowed into me. Not we're sorry, not we should have come for you. Just, you survived. I went to my room that night and sat in the dark, hugging my knees. My chest burned with a cocktail of anger and shame. They didn't care if I lived or died. And yet they expected me to pour myself back into their lives, to keep the machine running smoothly. But I was done being their invisible gear. The escalation came in small, ugly ways. When Jenna's soccer tournament rolled around, she asked if I'd drive her 2 towns over because Mom was busy. I said no. Her eyes went wide. No? What do you mean no? You always drive me. Not anymore. She stomped her foot like a child, her voice shrill. You're so selfish, Lauren. No wonder Mom and Dad say you're impossible. The words should have hurt, but instead, I felt something strange. Liberation. Then there was Tyler, sweet when he wanted to be, cool when he echoed them. One night, he asked me to help him finish a school project. When I hesitated, he sneered, "Forget it, Jenna was right, you're useless." I felt my nails dig crescents into my palms, but I forced a smile. "Figure it out yourself, Ty. You're not a baby anymore." He glared, muttering under his breath as he stormed off. The house grew colder with every no I said, every refusal to play the dutiful daughter. Meals passed in silence. My name was mentioned less and less, as though ignoring me would shame me back into compliance. But here's the thing. Silence had been my prison for years. Now, I was learning to weaponize it. I began keeping to myself, eating dinner after they were done, avoiding family movie nights, locking my bedroom door. At first, it unsettled them, then it annoyed them, and finally it threatened them. Because my absence wasn't convenient anymore, it forced them to feel their own imbalance. Mom would mutter, "She thinks she's better than us now." Dad would grumble, "She'll come around, she always does." And Jenna? She started picking fights, needling me about everything from my clothes to my friends. "You'll never make it on your own," she'd sneer. "You don't have what it takes. You'll come crawling back to us begging for help." But what she didn't know was that I was already planning. The more they dismissed me, the more I collected their words, their actions, like evidence in a trial. I wrote everything down in my journal. The night they left me stranded, the dismissive comments, the refusals to take accountability. I documented it all, page after page, as if preparing a case. Because I realized something important. People like my family thrive on image. To the outside world, they were caring, respectable, generous. But the truth, they were selfish, cruel, hollow. And the moment that image cracked, everything would unravel. Still, it wasn't easy. Nights were long, and loneliness weighed heavy. There were times I second-guessed myself, wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was dramatic. But then the memories would resurface. The sound of Jenna's laughter at that party while I begged for help. The way Mom dismissed my fear as making a scene. Dad's sigh when I asked for rescue. Those memories hardened me again, reminded me why I couldn't cave. The breaking point came during one of Dad's follow-up appointments. We all sat in the doctor's office together, the sterile smell of disinfectant sharp in my nose. The doctor asked Dad how we'd been managing stress at home. Before Dad could answer, Mom chimed in, "Oh, we're a very supportive family. Everyone pulls together." I let out a bitter laugh before I could stop myself. The doctor glanced at me, surprised. "Something funny?" Mom hissed under her breath. I met her eyes, my voice low but steady. "Just thinking how interesting it is, hearing you call this family supportive." The room went quiet. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Jenna shot daggers at me. Tyler fidgeted. But I didn't look away. For the first time, I said it out loud, the truth. After that day, I stopped waiting for them to validate me. They never would. Instead, I turned inward, sharpening my resolve. I started working longer shifts at the diner, saving every dollar I could. While my family bickered about groceries and bills, I was quietly stacking my own survival fund. I spent nights researching about toxic family systems, about emotional abuse, about how people like my parents and sister manipulated narratives to stay in control. The more I read, the clearer it became. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was their scapegoat, the one they dumped their shadows on to keep themselves shining. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. One night, Jenna cornered me in the hallway. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? Working your little diner job, saving pennies like that's going to change anything. You'll never escape. This is your family. You'll always need us." I smiled, not the broken smile they were used to, but a new one that held promise. "Maybe?" I said softly. "Or maybe you'll need me." Her brow furrowed, confused, but I brushed past her, heart pounding, because for the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I felt dangerous. The turning point didn't happen in one dramatic explosion. It came quietly, like a tide creeping in, subtle but unstoppable. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling for their approval. I wasn't chasing scraps of affection. I was planning. And the strange thing, it felt good. I tested my power in small ways first. Jenna had a big soccer match coming up, the kind the whole town turned out for. She was the star forward, the golden girl everyone praised. She came into my room one night, nails painted, hair freshly curled, and tossed her jersey on my bed. "Can you iron this for me? I need it perfect tomorrow." Old Lauren would have done it instantly, desperate for a thank you that never came. But new Lauren? I looked at the jersey, then at her. No. Her head snapped up. "Excuse me?" I said no. "Iron it yourself." Her jaw dropped. "You're unbelievable. Do you know how important this game is?" "More important than your sister freezing on the side of the road?" I shot back. Her face flushed red. She stormed out, muttering about how I was jealous, bitter, pathetic. But later that night, I heard the hiss of the iron in her room, followed by a frustrated scream when she burned a corner of the jersey. I smiled in the dark. One small victory. Then came Tyler. He was supposed to turn in a science fair project, a model volcano he'd procrastinated on. Normally, I would have stepped in, gluing and painting until it looked presentable. Instead, when he begged, I shook my head. "Do it yourself, Ty." He pouted, angry tears in his eyes. "You're the worst sister ever." "Maybe." I said, "but at least I don't let people freeze to death." He stomped off, slamming the door. The next day, he came home with a participation ribbon instead of a medal. Mom was livid. "Why didn't you help him? Do you know how embarrassed he was?" I looked her straight in the eye. Maybe now he knows how I felt. She gasped, scandalized, but I didn't flinch. The words tasted sharp and clean on my tongue. Those small acts of defiance built my confidence. For years, I'd been their safety net. Now, I was pulling it away, one thread at a time. And the more I pulled, the more their perfect family image began to fray. But I didn't want petty victories. I wanted cracks wide enough for everyone else to see. The chance came at church. My family was deeply involved. Mom ran bake sales, Dad ushered, Jenna sang in the choir. Everyone thought we were pillars of the community. One Sunday, Pastor Miller preached about family love and sacrifice. I sat in the pew, my parents nodding along, smiling their polished smiles, and something inside me snapped. When the service ended, a group gathered in the fellowship hall. People congratulated Mom on her wonderful children. She beamed, talking about Jenna's sports, Tyler's potential, Dad's hard work. And me? She didn't mention my name once. So when someone asked me directly, "Lauren, how's college going?" I answered honestly. "Well, I was stranded on the highway in January. Called everyone here, but no one came. If it weren't for a stranger, I might not be standing here." The room went silent. My mother's face turned white, then red. And, "Lauren," she hissed, grabbing my arm. "That's not appropriate." But the damage was done. People exchanged glances, whispers buzzing like flies. For once, the perfect Hayes family mask slipped in public. That moment lit something in me. Shame had always been my burden, but now I realized it could be theirs too. I began dropping small truths in public spaces. At Jenna's games, when parents praised her dedication, I'd smile sweetly and say, yeah, if only she was as dedicated to picking up her stranded sister. At Tyler's school events, when teachers gushed about how supportive his family was, I'd murmur, supportive depends on who you ask. Each time, my parents bristled, their smiles forced, their voices tight. And each time, I felt the power shift a little more. But the most satisfying moment came one night at dinner. We were eating meatloaf, the TV murmuring in the background. Jenna scrolled on her phone. Tyler shoved peas around his plate. Mom and Dad discussed bills. No one looked at me. Finally, I set down my fork. Do you realize, I said slowly, that if Roger hadn't stopped that night, I might have died? The table went still. I called every single one of you, and not one of you showed up. Lauren, Dad started, his voice heavy. No? I cut him off. My voice shook, but I didn't care. You don't get to brush it aside. You left me. You all decided I wasn't worth saving, and now you want me to babysit, to cook, to drive, to help with projects? Why should I? Silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums. Finally, Jenna muttered, you're so dramatic. But for once, Mom didn't scold me. Dad didn't dismiss me. They just sat there, looking like people who'd been caught stealing. That was the night I stopped being invisible. Not because they finally saw me, but because I finally saw myself. I wasn't their servant. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was a woman who had survived their neglect, their indifference, their cruelty, and now I had the power to decide what came next. I began laying the groundwork for something bigger. I saved screenshots of texts, Jenna refusing to help, Mom brushing me off, Dad sighing in annoyance. I kept my journals safe, pages filled with timestamps and details. And slowly, I started to imagine what it would feel like to show the world exactly who the Hayes family really was. Because revenge, I realized, isn't about screaming. It's about precision. It's about timing. And my time was coming. Revenge doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It brews, slow and deliberate, like a storm building over weeks until the sky finally breaks. That's how it was for me. By the time I reached my breaking point, I wasn't reckless anymore. I was patient. And patience, I learned, could be lethal. The first step was simple: documentation. I bought a cheap prepaid phone with a recording app and kept it hidden in my room. Every time Mom launched into one of her tirades about how useless I was, I hit record. Every time Jenna belittled me, mocking how I'd always be stuck here, I hit record. Tyler's parroting insults, Gad's dismissive sighs, they all went into my digital vault. It was tedious at first, but then it became addictive. Evidence piled up, hours of audio, screenshots of texts, journal entries matched to dates. If my family wanted to pretend I was crazy, I'd make sure the truth was undeniable. The second step was leverage. I knew their weak spots better than anyone. For Mom, it was her reputation in the church. For Dad, it was his credibility at work. For Jenna, her carefully curated image as the golden child scholar, athlete, community darling. And Tyler? He was too young to be a direct target, but his dependency on them made him collateral. I didn't want to hurt him, but I knew the fallout would touch him regardless. And that knowledge hardened me, because they hadn't hesitated to hurt me. I started small, like a scientist testing reactions. At church, I slipped hints into conversations with other parishioners. Funny how people think our family's so supportive. I guess they don't know what it's like behind closed doors. Then I'd smile, vague enough to be dismissed, pointed enough to spark curiosity. At Dad's office holiday party, I casually mentioned to one of his coworkers how lucky he was that Roger had saved me since my family hadn't shown up. The man frowned, clearly unsettled. Word spreads fast in small offices. And at Jenna's soccer games, I kept my phone out, casually recording when she screamed at me in the parking lot for not doing her chores. Later, I posted a short anonymous clip on a local gossip forum. Nothing that identified me directly, but enough for whispers to start. It worked. I could feel the shift. People looked at us differently. Not much, not enough to be obvious, but enough that my parents stiffened when they noticed. Enough that Jenna's friends asked her awkward questions. Enough that Dad came home one night muttering about rumors at work. But that wasn't enough. I didn't just want whispers. I wanted the truth to roar. The third step was allies. Roger, the man who'd saved me that night, wasn't just a kind stranger. Over time, I kept in touch. He had daughters my age, and when I told him bits of my story, he listened without judgment. He didn't push, didn't try to fix things, just listened. One evening over coffee, I told him more about the recordings, the neglect, the years of invisibility. His eyes softened, but his jaw tightened. "You're not crazy," he said firmly. You were abandoned. And if you want to tell your story, I'll back you up." That was all I needed, validation, and a potential witness. I also reached out to Aunt Maggie, my mom's estranged sister. They hadn't spoken in years after a fight about inheritance, but when I called, her voice cracked with recognition. "Lauren, oh, honey, I always worried about you. How have they been treating you?" I told her everything. Not in one sitting. It took weeks. But by the time I finished, she was furious. "I knew your mother could be cold," she muttered. "But this, leaving you like that? She doesn't deserve her reputation. Tell me what you need, sweetheart. I'll help however I can." And just like that, I had another ally. The fourth step was timing. Revenge, I realized, was like gardening. You plant seeds, you water them, and you wait for the right season to harvest. If you rush, you ruin the crop. So I waited. I went to work, stacked money in my savings, and played the role of the withdrawn but obedient daughter. I let them think they'd beaten me down again. All the while I was planning. The opportunity presented itself in the form of Jenna's scholarship banquet. She'd won a partial ride to a state university, and my parents treated it like she'd cured cancer. The entire extended family, the church elders, her coaches, and Dad's colleagues would all be there. A perfect stage. For weeks, I rehearsed my moves. Not rash, not dramatic, surgical. I gathered the best clips of audio, Mom dismissing my freezing night as making a scene, Jenna laughing about it, Gad telling me to stop being dramatic. I spliced them into one clear timeline. I made copies, digital, USB drives, even one in a safety deposit box. If they tried to destroy it, it would still exist. Then, I crafted my speech. Not a rant, not a scream, but a calm, measured recounting of what had happened, backed by proof. The night before the banquet, I couldn't sleep. My chest buzzed with adrenaline, my hands trembling as I laid out my outfit. Not too bold, not too meek. A simple navy dress, polished, unassuming. In the mirror, I saw a version of myself that no longer looked invisible. My eyes were sharp, my chin steady. For the first time in 19 years, I felt like the author of my own story. The banquet hall smelled of polished wood and catered food. Laughter echoed as people congratulated Jenna, clapping Dad on the back, praising Mom's amazing parenting. I sat at the family table, quiet but alert, my phone heavy in my purse. My moment was coming. When Jenna took the stage to give her speech, she basked in the glow, talking about family support and sacrifices. People nodded, applauding. And then the MC announced a surprise acknowledgement, inviting the Hayes family to share a few words about their daughter's success. Mom rose first, her voice syrupy sweet. "We've always been such a close family, always supporting one another." My jaw clenched. Lies. Dad followed. praising Jenna's dedication and hard work. Finally, eyes turned to me, the forgotten daughter. And I knew this was it. The MC's voice echoed through the banquet hall. And now, let's hear from Lauren Hayes, Jenna's older sister. For a second, the room seemed to blur. My heart hammered, my palms slick against the fabric of my dress. Every instinct told me to shrink, to retreat into the invisible role I'd played my whole life. But then I looked at Jenna, beaming in her sparkly dress, Mom dabbing fake tears, Dad puffing out his chest, and the fire in my chest roared back to life. I stood, shoulders straight, and walked to the podium. The microphone squealed briefly, making the room fall silent. All eyes were on me, something I had never experienced in my family's shadow. I smiled, steady. I'm Lauren, Jenna's sister, and I guess tonight is about celebrating family, support, and sacrifice. Applause scattered politely. Mom gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I gripped the edges of the podium. I'd like to share a story. You could feel the air shift. People leaned forward, expecting a sweet memory about Jenna or our family's love. Instead, I began. Last January, I was stranded on the side of a highway. It was below freezing, my car broke down, and I had no way home. I called my family. My dad sighed and told me to figure it out. My mom said they were having dinner and couldn't drop everything. My sister, I looked straight at Jenna, whose smile faltered, was at a party and laughed when I begged for help. My little brother told me later that I was being dramatic. No one came. A hush fell. Forks froze mid-air, eyes widened. If it weren't for a stranger, a man named Roger, I might not be here today, because my family decided I wasn't worth saving. Gasps rippled. Mom hissed, "Lauren, enough!" But I didn't stop. My voice grew steadier with each word. For years, I was the invisible one, the chauffeur, the babysitter, the background character in their story. But that night, I realized something. I wasn't invisible. I was unwanted. And I survived anyway. Then, I pulled my phone from my purse. And in case you think I'm exaggerating, listen. I pressed play. The room filled with the sound of Mom's voice. "We can't just drop everything for you." Dad's sigh. "Lauren, you're fine. You survived." Jenna's laughter. "Ugh, are you serious? I'm not leaving this party." The audio echoed in the cavernous hall. People shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A woman near the front shook her head in disbelief. Mom lunged forward, hissing, "Turn that off!" But I held the phone higher, my voice cutting through. This is who they are, not the smiling, supportive family you see in church or at soccer games. Behind closed doors, they're cold, neglectful, cruel. The silence afterward was deafening. Then came the whispers. Not polite curiosity, but horrified judgment. People leaned toward each other, murmuring. Coaches, teachers, church elders, all the people my family relied on for reputation were staring at them with new, critical eyes. Jenna's face crumpled. "You're ruining everything," she screeched. "No," I said calmly. "I'm telling the truth. And the truth doesn't ruin things. It reveals them." The MC, flustered, tried to regain control, but the damage was done. Mom's hands shook as she grabbed at Dad's arm. Dad's face was stone, but his eyes darted, calculating, realizing just how badly their image had cracked. I stepped down from the podium, my legs steady as stone. For once, I wasn't the one trembling. Afterward, the fallout was immediate. People avoided them at the banquet. Jenna's coach, who had been gushing about her moments earlier, barely shook her hand. Church friends whispered in corners. And me? People approached quietly, offering hushed words like, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." For once, sympathy was directed at me, not them. The ride home was silent at first. Then Mom erupted. "How dare you embarrass us like that? Do you realize what you've done?" I looked out the window, calm. "Yes, I've told the truth." Dad's voice was low, dangerous. "You've destroyed this family's reputation." I turned to him. "No, you did. I just stopped covering for you." Jenna sobbed in the back seat, mascara streaking her cheeks. Tyler stared wide-eyed, finally seeing the cracks. That night, Mom tried to confiscate my phone, but she didn't know I had backups on my laptop, on a USB drive, even sent to Aunt Maggie and Roger. If they destroyed one, others remained. The next morning, the whispers had already spread. Aunt Maggie called, her voice smug. "Oh, well, Patricia always thought she was untouchable. Now everyone sees the truth." Roger texted, "Proud of you. They can't bury you anymore." At church that Sunday, the atmosphere was electric. At church, the Hayes family glided in like royalty. This time, people avoided them. No one asked about Jenna's scholarship. No one praised Dad's dedication. Instead, eyes flicked toward me with recognition, empathy, even respect. The sermon that day was about honesty. I almost laughed at the irony. At school, Jenna's shine dulled. Her friends distanced themselves, whispers chasing her down hallways. Teachers stopped praising her as effusively. Even Tyler grew quieter, watching me with something that looked like guilt. And Dad? His boss called him in for a conversation about professionalism and the family image he'd always bragged about. Mom's bake sale committee politely suggested she take a break. The dominoes were falling, and for once, I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. Fallout is never instant. It's not a single explosion. It's the quiet settling of ash that covers everything. And after the banquet, that ash touched every corner of my family's life. At first, they tried damage control. Mom called neighbors, insisting I was unstable, that I'd fabricated everything. Dad rehearsed lines about family disagreements blown out of proportion. Jenna cried on social media, painting herself as the victim of a jealous sister. But the problem with lies is that once the truth leaks, it stains everything. The recordings spread. I hadn't released them widely myself. I didn't need to. All it took was one person at the banquet forwarding it to another, and soon the clips were circulating in group chats, Facebook feeds, whispered conversations at the grocery store. People who'd once smiled at my family now crossed the street. At church, Mom tried to pass around her famous lemon bars at fellowship hour. No one touched them. Women who used to gossip with her about fundraisers avoided her table. Pastor Miller called her in for a meeting, not to confront, but to confront. "Patricia," he said bluntly, "your reputation has brought harm to this congregation. Perhaps it's time to step back from leadership." She came home from that meeting with red eyes and trembling hands. For years, she had been queen bee of the church. Overnight, she was a pariah. Dad fared no better. His boss at the insurance office, who had tolerated his bragging about the perfect family, was less forgiving when clients started whispering. "We value integrity here," his boss told him. "And unfortunately, perception is reality. You might consider early retirement," which was a polite way of saying, "You're done." And Jenna, my golden sister, who'd basked in endless praise, her scholarship remained, but the glow around it dimmed. Coaches who once called her a leader now looked at her with disappointment. Teachers stopped using her as an example. Her social media, once filled with likes and adoring comments, became a battlefield of whispered questions and thinly veiled shade. She stormed into my room one night, tears streaking her face. "You ruined my life," she screamed. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I closed my journal calmly. "No, Jenna, I didn't ruin your life. I just stopped letting you ruin mine." Tyler was different. He was still young, still pliable. For weeks, he avoided me, guilt etched into his face. One night, I found him standing outside my door, fidgeting. "Lauren?" he whispered. "Yeah? I'm sorry for what I said, for not helping. I didn't know it was that bad." For the first time, I softened. He was a kid, shaped by the voices around him. And maybe, just maybe, he had a chance to grow differently. "It's not about sorry, Ty," I said gently. "It's about choosing to do better. Someday, you'll have to decide if you want to be like them or if you want to break the cycle." He nodded, eyes wet. And in that moment, I felt a small sliver of hope. Meanwhile, I flourished. I moved out within months. renting a tiny apartment above a bookstore. It smelled of old paper and coffee from the cafe downstairs. For the first time, the space was mine, walls painted in colors I chose, dishes stacked the way I wanted, silence that belonged to me alone. I worked extra shifts, saved, and started community college. Professors noticed me, not as background, but as a sharp, thoughtful student. I made friends who valued me, who listened when I spoke. For the first time, I felt visible. And the strangest part, my family barely tried to stop me. Maybe they knew they'd lost their grip. Maybe they were too busy salvaging their own sinking reputations. Months passed and the fallout deepened. Mom stopped attending church altogether. Dad spent his days in bitter silence, nursing beers and watching TV reruns. Jenna withdrew from social circles, her laughter gone, her sparkle dimmed. The house that had once buzzed with self-importance now felt heavy, hollow, suffocating. And me? I walked taller every time I visited town. People nodded at me, offered smiles, even whispered, "Good for you." No one said it outright, but I could feel it. Respect. The final act of closure came unexpectedly. One afternoon, Roger, my rescuer, invited me to speak at his daughter's high school about resilience. "You've lived through something most kids can't imagine," he said. "You should tell them." At first, I hesitated. But when I stood in front of that classroom, looking at rows of teenagers who were still figuring themselves out, I spoke from my heart. I told them about invisibility, about neglect, about the night on the highway, and about how revenge wasn't just about destroying others, it was about reclaiming yourself. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a girl in the front row raised her hand. "So, it gets better?" she asked softly. I smiled. "It gets better when you decide it will. When you stop letting people define you, and you start defining yourself." That night, walking home, I realized something important. My revenge had already served its purpose. My family's empire had crumbled, their reputations tarnished. But the real victory wasn't their ruin, it was my rise. For years, I had been the invisible one. Now, I was undeniable. In the end, justice didn't look like flames and fury. It looked like freedom. It looked like me, standing on my own, breathing without their weight pressing on my chest. I used to think revenge was about making them hurt the way I hurt. But what I learned is this: the sweetest revenge isn't their pain, it's your peace. And I finally have mine. So, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have stood up and let the truth burn through their lies? If this story made you clench your fists, or maybe even smile when justice was served, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder. You are never as powerless as they make you feel. Because revenge isn't just about tearing them down, it's about rising back up.